transit system in Europe was brought on by the Industrial Revolution towards the end of the 19th century. It was a strongly unifying system that allowed the transportation of goods and people between countries and within cities. This unification was particularly important in the capital city of Berlin, where major administrative sectors and the urban economy were being developed. However, radical shifts in governmental control ultimately played a huge part in the organization of the rail.
Over the past century, rail transit in Berlin has gone through a series of ups and downs, both economically and conditionally. These shifts in the economy have significantly affected the unification of people, not only in Germany, but in Europe as a whole. Berlin's U-Bahn line opened in 1902 as a solution to the increasing transportation problems facing the city. The name U-Bahn means underground railway, and it is essentially the backbone of the public transport system throughout Berlin. The railway enabled the economy to thrive on the transportation of goods, and it became the public's primary source of transportation. Initial construction was sparked by the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, which transformed the city's economy. Construction slowed throughout the 1920s as a result of hyperinflation, and was concluded by 1930, just as the economy was on the verge of depression. From 1933 to 1945, the seizure of power by the National Socialists brought many changes that affected how the transit system was used. During the war, many of the underground stations were used as shelters from air raid, as the city was bombed continuously. These bombings brought the completed system into a state of disrepair. In 1945, in a desperate measure to slow Soviet advance, the Nord-Süd-Bahn line was flooded, causing it to be unusable for the next 2 years.
This low point in the history of the railway was immediately counteracted by the reconstruction of the line through the next 5 years. Although the war had damaged or destroyed much of the network, reconstruction was completed in 1950, bringing the conditions of the railway back up to a high point. The railway continued to be used throughout the 50s, easily transporting goods and people through the city of Berlin. Nevertheless, the following division of Berlin into east and west sectors brought further changes to the U-Bahn. The Berlin Wall was erected in 1961, dividing the city both physically and economically. As a result of this division, many of the train lines were either cut off, blockaded, or shortened in order to prevent people from moving between east and west. East Berlin train stations were completely shut down, and West Berlin was required to pay an annual fee of 20 million euros to allow trains into Eastern Territory. Even then, trains were not allowed to stop at any stations on the way to Friedrichstrasse, which was the only station that West Berliners were allowed to disembark at. All of the stations that the train bypassed along the way subsequently became Geisterbahnhof, or ghost stations. These stations were patrolled by armed East German border guards, the men we now know as the Stasi.
These ghost stations, and all other unused stations in East Berlin, soon fell into an intense state of disrepair, yet again. All of the reconstruction efforts from the previous 15 years were forfeited.
While the system in the east was sinking deeper and deeper into disrepair, the railway system in the west was thriving. The West German capital used funds from its economic success to extend and build new lines throughout the west. This extreme contrast within one city is the perfect example of how the condition of the rail and the unity of the lines are directly affected by the economy. The East Berliners had to wait nearly 15 years for any extension to be made to the railway system. This extension finally came in 1989, only a few months before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
On November 9, 1989, the transportation restrictions placed upon East Berliners were lifted. The wall had fallen, and the city was ready to start its reunification. Thousands of people from the east flooded the border checkpoints, demanding entry into West Berlin. Because of the influx of people from east to west, the train stations were forced to start reopening. Janowitzbruck, which was the former ghost station, was the first to reopen as an additional crossing point. Many other stations soon followed in reopening, and by July 1, 1990, all border controls were removed. People were now able to use these train stations that had been shut down for years, but many of them were in critical condition. Parts of the U-Bahn required extensive work that included rebuilding stations, reopening tunnels, and reclaiming stations that had been previously repurposed. After the stations reached yet another low point under communist control, It was time for them to begin their next slope upwards towards reconstruction, renovation, and reestablishment as the backbone of the transport system. The amalgamated line was reopened on November 13, 1993. This marked the reunification of Berlin as a city that relies heavily on the transit system, even today.
The system in Berlin has gone through some critical changes throughout the century, creating both unity and disunity in the city. These changes have all been directly related to the economic and political standing of the city itself. The economy has been and continues to be a major influence on rail transportation, not only in Berlin, but in Europe as a whole. Since the onset of the economic crisis in 2008, the performance of the rail sector has significantly weakened. Not only has the economy continued to have an effect on the transportation, but it is now creating an undeniable divide between the countries in the Eurozone. The current Euro crisis has made what once was a strong union become a strained, disorderly relationship. While countries like Spain and Greece are facing unemployment, bank failures, and foreclosures, Germany is prospering.
The family-owned companies that make up the backbone of the German economy are undergoing their biggest boom for 50 years, and they're brushing off the strong euro like water off a duck's back.
Because many railway stations in Europe were built over 100 years ago, they are in desperate need of modernization. However, because Berlin has gone through the series of ups and downs, renewal of the city's transit system is not a priority as it is in the rest of Europe. Berlin is doing better than ever before in regards to both its rail transportation and its economy. This fluctuation of ups and downs has been a direct result of economic status, and it has become apparent that this economic status is the defining factor in the unity and disunity of people.